On April 10, 1967, Cook County Sheriff's Officer Ralph Probst was fatally shot in his hometown Illinois residence, a crime that remains unsolved over half a century later. Before joining the Cook County Sheriff's Department, Probst worked as a chemical engineer. In 1964, he graduated from the police academy and was assigned to the Special Elite Tactical Squad, focusing on organized crime investigations. Known for his strict adherence to protocol, Probst earned respect among peers and inadvertently made powerful enemies, including notorious mobster Sam DeStefano. In January 1967, while guarding DeStefano in a hospital, Probst enforced strict security measures, prompting DeStefano to threaten his life, a threat that was not taken seriously. On the night of his slaying, Probst and his wife, Marlene, were watching the Academy Awards at home. Marlene fell asleep on the couch, but was abruptly awakened by the sound of an explosion and breaking glass. She observed a cloud of smoke near the television and discovered Ralph lying on the kitchen floor, having been shot once in the back of the head through the kitchen window. Despite immediate efforts to summon help, Probst perished as a result of his injuries. The investigation revealed that the bullet was fired from a recently manufactured .41 caliber Magnum, a rare weapon at the time, with only about 2,000 in circulation in the country. Despite this lead, authorities were unable to locate the weapon. Initial suspicions fell on Sam DeStefano due to his prior threat. However, he was incarcerated at the time of the slaying, and no evidence linked him to orchestrating the crime from prison. Investigators also scrutinized Marlene, puzzled by her account of seeing smoke inside the house and the presence of broken glass outside the window. Ballistic tests demonstrated that firing a shot from close range outside the window could produce smoke inside and cause glass to fall outward, corroborating Marlene's testimony. Marlene was eventually completely cleared of suspicion in her husband's slaying. Attention then turned to the possibility that Probst was independently investigating a vice ring, potentially making him a target. Days before his death, he was seen visiting the home of ex-convict Frank Calvisi, purportedly inquiring about neighborhood burglaries. Additionally, a man resembling Calvisi had visited a house for sale across the street from the Probst residence, expressing unusual interest in its floor plan relative to the Probst home. Although a neighbor initially identified Calvisi in a police lineup, he later recanted, possibly out of fear. Calvisi died in 1974 without being charged in connection with the slaying. Another theory suggested that the slaying might be linked to his knowledge of illegal operations involving organized crime figures. His partner believed that Probst had confidential information that posed a threat to certain individuals. Despite extensive investigations, including reviewing Probst's case files and personal records, no conclusive evidence was found to support this theory. That said, given his focus on organized crime investigations, this theory clearly can't be discounted. Over the years, the case has remained cold, with no arrests or definitive leads. Lamont Coleman, known professionally as Big L, was a prominent figure in the 1990s hip-hop scene, celebrated for his exceptional lyrical prowess and storytelling abilities. Born on May 30th, 1974, in Harlem, New York, he emerged from a neighborhood rich in musical innovation. Big L's journey into music began in his teenage years, when he started freestyling and battling in his Harlem neighborhood. His reputation as a formidable rapper grew, leading to his first professional appearances on other hip-hop artists' albums in '92 and '93. In 1993, Big L signed with Columbia Records, and 2 years later, he released his debut album, Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous. Also, for those who are unaware, the name is a wordplay on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, a TV show which purported to show off how famous people really lived. The album featured tracks like Put It On and MVP, which highlighted his intricate wordplay and vivid storytelling. Despite its critical acclaim, the album didn't achieve significant commercial success at the time, and sadly, this would be the only album released during his lifetime. In 1998, Big L founded his own independent label, Flamboyant Entertainment, aiming to have greater creative control over his music. Through this label, he released the single Ebonics, which put him back front and center when the song was praised as one of the top singles of the year by The Source, a hip-hop magazine. Tragically, Big L's life was cut short on February 15, 1999, when he was fatally shot in Harlem. He was struck multiple times in the head and chest in a drive-by near his home. The slaying sent shockwaves through the hip-hop community, leading to widespread speculation about the motive behind the killing. Some theories suggested that Big L was targeted due to associations with individuals involved in criminal activities, while others believed it was a case of mistaken identity. In May 1999, his childhood friend, Gerard Woodley, was arrested in connection with the slaying, but was later released due to insufficient evidence. Speculation has run rampant, with the most common theory suggesting that Big L's brother's criminal activities had something to do with the slaying. However, others have speculated that Woodley and Big L had a personal feud, and that Woodley retaliated by eliminating Big L. Despite the arrest of Woodley, he was never charged in relation to the crime, and Big L's death remains unsolved. On February 19, 1991, the body of an unidentified man, later referred to as the Englewood John Doe, was discovered in an alley adjacent to a residential area. The victim, a white male estimated to be between 55 and 75 years old, was found lying in a dumpster, partially concealed by trash. He stood approximately 6 feet tall and weighed around 155 pounds. His hair was gray or partially gray, and he had a light brown mustache and brown eyes. Notably, he bore a possible surgical scar on his chest, a 9-inch scar on the right side of his back, and numerous moles on his abdomen. At the time of discovery, the man was dressed in a long-sleeved beige shirt layered over a navy blue t-shirt, blue jeans, black loafers, and black socks. He also wore a distinctive black belt featuring a white metal buckle adorned with 2 turquoise stones and 1 brown or red stone. Despite efforts by law enforcement and the community, the identity of the Englewood John Doe remains unknown. The circumstances surrounding his death are equally mysterious, as the cause of death has not been publicly disclosed. Over the years, forensic artists have created reconstructions of the man's appearance in hopes of generating leads, but these attempts have yet to yield definitive results. The case of the Englewood John Doe is one of several unidentified person cases in the area during that period. For instance, in 1994, the remains of a young boy were found in a storage unit in Englewood. Although the boy was eventually identified in 2017, his name was withheld, and details surrounding his death remain scarce. Some have speculated that there's a connection between these cases, but in my view, there's absolutely nothing to indicate that's the case, aside from them being found in the same locale. Charles Morgan, known to his friends as Chuck, was a 39-year-old escrow agent living in Tucson, Arizona in the mid-1970s. He worked in real estate escrow, a role that put him in a unique position to handle large sums of money, perform title searches, and facilitate property transactions between buyers and sellers. His job also entailed interacting with financial institutions, lawyers, and many influential and wealthy people. On March 22, 1977, Charles Morgan left his home to take his daughters to school. However, he didn't return from this short trip as planned. According to his wife, Ruth, Chuck failed to pick his daughters up from school, which prompted immediate concern since this was totally out of character for him. No one could reach him, and it soon became evident that Chuck had vanished under puzzling circumstances. During this time, Ruth told authorities that her husband had hinted he was involved in some kind of top-secret government operation. Chuck had reportedly expressed fear for his life and the safety of his family. However, his statements were vague, leaving many unanswered questions about the reasons behind his apprehension. The fact that he had never gone off the grid before only heightened the sense of urgency in locating him. Ruth claimed she received a strange phone call from someone shortly after Chuck went missing. The anonymous female voice, according to Ruth, said something cryptic like, "Chuck is all right," before quickly hanging up. This odd phone call added to the case's mystery and planted the seed that perhaps Chuck was still alive and being held, or sheltered, somewhere. 3 days after disappearing, Chuck turned up at his family's house in a somewhat disoriented state. He was missing a shoe and appeared to have been roughed up. When he returned, Chuck was unable to speak. He indicated that someone had forcibly made him take a substance which made him temporarily mute. He wrote notes for his wife, indicating he had been kidnapped and tortured. During this ordeal, Chuck reportedly insisted that no one call the police, out of fear that it would put him and his family in even greater danger. He also claimed he had managed to escape from captors, but provided no explicit details regarding their identities. Chuck only said that a secret organization wanted him dead, implying that he had knowledge of illegal deals or possible witness testimony that implicated powerful individuals. Over the next few days, Ruth cared for him, and he slowly regained his capacity to speak. She tried to convince him to allow her to call the authorities, but his reluctance to involve law enforcement was firm. Chuck maintained he had to quote-unquote handle this on his own. Months passed, and Chuck continued to carry on with his life in a somewhat uneasy but routine manner. Then, on June 7, 1977, he disappeared again. On June 18, 1977, Chuck Morgan's body was discovered in the desert just outside of Tucson. Chuck had been eliminated with a bullet to the back of the head, execution style. He was wearing a bulletproof vest, which indicated he had clearly planned on being attacked. The weapon that had fired the lethal shot was found near him, but there were no discernible fingerprints on it. The county medical examiner's office declared the death a self-deletion. Yet the logistics of a bullet wound in the back of the head, the presence of a bulletproof vest, and the strangeness of the entire scenario cast considerable doubt on this theory. Further adding to the mystery, a $2 bill clipped to Chuck's underwear has become one of the most famous and confounding pieces of evidence. On the bill's front, 7 Spanish names were listed, each corresponding to letters A through G. Above these names was the inscription Ecclesiastes 12, with arrows pointing to numbers 1 through 8 within the bill's serial number. This references a Bible passage that contemplates mortality and the afterlife. The bill's reverse featured a crude map highlighting roads between Tucson and the Mexican border, specifically marking Robles Junction and Sasabe. These areas have been noted by the authorities as being notorious for smuggling activities. Additionally, the signers of the Declaration of Independence were numbered 1 through 7. The significance of these markings remains entirely speculative at this point. Inside his vehicle, they discovered handcuffs, extra ammo, and what appeared to be a cache of documents. The nature of these documents remains in dispute, but some investigators at the time thought it might pertain to large-scale money laundering. Another odd detail emerged when an anonymous female caller, known only by the moniker Green Eyes, contacted the police. She claimed to have information about Chuck's death, asserting that she had last seen Chuck the day before he was found dead. According to Green Eyes, Chuck had shown her a briefcase with large amounts of cash and spoken of meeting an unknown individual. One of the most prevalent theories points to mafia involvement. By the 1970s, Tucson was known to have pockets of organized crime activity, often involving money laundering tied to land deals. As an escrow agent, Chuck Morgan may have facilitated transactions that were more sinister than they initially appeared on paper. In fact, later investigations revealed that he did escrow work for at least one mafia family, though the extent of his knowledge and complicity is unknown, at least to the general public. If he discovered evidence of illegal activity or threatened to cooperate with federal authorities, it could have put a target on his back. No direct government confirmation of Chuck's role has ever surfaced publicly. Nonetheless, Morgan's line of work and sudden death, combined with local mafia activity, make the organized crime theory plausible. Another widely circulated theory suggests that Chuck was involved in clandestine government affairs, potentially as an undercover informant or a secret operative. Chuck claimed to his wife that he was doing work for the Treasury Department. If he was indeed an informant, it could explain his fear of law enforcement involvement. He may have believed some members of the police were compromised, or that he needed to protect his cover. That said, it provides little explanation for why he wouldn't have reached out to his alleged contacts in the Treasury Department. There's also the theory that the authorities got it right in their initial investigation. This line of thinking suggested that Chuck had become increasingly paranoid, possibly due to threats, real or imagined, and orchestrated a bizarre scenario. Under this theory, Chuck underwent some form of psychotic break, potentially due to the extreme stress he was under. This break then caused him to act increasingly unusually, which eventually culminated in his end by his own hand. Recently, there's been a number of clickbait headlines suggesting that the CIA has confirmed the existence of aliens on Mars 1 million years ago. So buckle up for a bit while we go beyond the clickbait and find out what the CIA actually said. In the early 1970s, the US government initiated a series of investigations into psychic phenomena, particularly focusing on remote viewing. This is the purported ability to perceive distant or unseen targets using extrasensory perception. This interest was largely driven by reports suggesting that the Soviet Union was investing substantial resources into similar research. Consequently, the Pentagon and the U.S. Army launched programs such as the Stargate Project to explore potential military and intelligence applications of these phenomena. On May 22, 1984, the CIA conducted a remote viewing session aimed at exploring the possibility of ancient life on Mars. The session was part of the broader Stargate project, which sought to assess the efficacy of remote viewing in gathering intelligence. In this particular experiment, a remote viewer was provided with sealed coordinates corresponding to specific locations on Mars, approximately 1 million years ago. During the session, the remote viewer described perceiving large pyramid-like structures on the Martian surface, suggesting the remnants of an ancient civilization. The viewer also reported encountering tall, thin beings clad in unusual clothing who appeared to be in distress due to environmental catastrophes. These beings were described as seeking a new habitat to ensure their survival, indicating a possible exodus from their declining environment. The recent declassification of these documents has reignited discussions about the potential existence of intelligent life on Mars in the distant past. However, it's crucial to recognize that remote viewing, as a method, lacks empirical scientific support and is often met with skepticism. The Stargate project itself was terminated and declassified in 1995 after a Pentagon report concluded that it was never useful in any intelligence operation. Information provided by the program was vague and included irrelevant and erroneous data, leading to its discontinuation, at least officially. So no, the CIA has not confirmed life on Mars, but they have confirmed that in 1984, a remote viewer claims to have seen Martian giants. In my view, the real mystery here is why this alien life narrative is being pushed so hard right now. It's one thing to discuss weird drone sightings, but this newly declassified information contributes absolutely nothing to the alien discourse, at least in my view. This tale centers on a figure described as a severely burned man who haunts the area, particularly near Camp Comfort County Park and along Creek Road. The origins of this legend are often traced back to a significant fire in 1948. According to local lore, a father and son were caught in a devastating house fire that year. The father perished in the flames, while the son survived but was horribly burned. Traumatized and disfigured, the son is said to have fled into the nearby woods, where he lived out his life, scaring and terrorizing the local populace. Another version of the story suggests that this legend resulted from a car accident in the late 1940s. In this account, a father and son were involved in a crash on an overlook near Ojai. The vehicle tumbled off the road, and while the son was thrown clear, the father was trapped inside as the car exploded into flames. The son, unable to save his father and witnessing his horrific death, was driven to madness. Some variations of this tale claim that the son was found by authorities, wearing his father's skin, before fleeing into the woods. The charman is often described as a human-like figure with burnt clothing and skin, his face appearing as if it's melting. Witnesses have reported a strong smell of burnt flesh preceding his appearance. He is said to lurk near Creek Road, especially around the bridge over San Antonio Creek, now colloquially known as Charman Bridge, according to some sources. Local legend holds that if one stops on this bridge and calls out for the charman, he may appear, sometimes attacking vehicles or individuals. Over the years, the legend has become an integral part of Ojai's cultural fabric. It's a popular subject of local ghost tours and campfire stories, captivating both residents and visitors. Some businesses have even embraced the legend. For instance, I was able to find a local hot sauce company named Charman, which pays homage to this eerie tale. The Grand Grimoire, also known as the Red Dragon, is one of the most infamous grimoires in occult history. Known for its association with black magic, it's said to contain powerful rituals for summoning demons and forming pacts. While some editions date the manuscript as far back as 1521 or 1522, historians argue the text is likely from the early 18th century. The text's authorship is attributed to one Antonio del Rabina, though little is known about this figure or whether he's even a historical person. Like many grimoires, it claims to have roots in the writings of King Solomon, a legendary figure often linked to magical wisdom. According to the Grand Grimoire, Antonio del Rabina wasn't actually the author of the book, but rather, he transcribed a text, which was written by Solomon himself. This practice of connecting magical texts to ancient authoritative sources was common and helped establish the book's credibility. The Grand Grimoire is divided into two main sections, each detailing specific magical practices. The first section outlines the evocation of Lucifuge Rofacal, described as a high-ranking demon serving under Lucifer himself. The text provides instructions on summoning Lucifuge and negotiating a pact, often aimed at acquiring wealth or worldly power. The second section deals with the specifics of making and sealing these demonic pacts. It explains the tools, rituals, and evocations necessary for the process, emphasizing the need for strict adherence to the outlined steps. Aside from its focus on demonology, the grimoire contains a variety of spells and rituals meant to address other desires. These include rites for love, invisibility, and communicating with the dead. Each spell typically requires specific tools, such as consecrated candles, engraved symbols, and protective circles, reflecting common elements in European occult practices of the period. These spells are presented with detailed instructions, underscoring the manuscript's emphasis on precision and ritualistic discipline. While its content draws heavily from earlier grimoires, such as the Grimoire of Pope Honorius, the Grand Grimoire gained a distinct reputation. Some have referred to it as the most dangerous grimoire, a claim rooted in its bold approach to summoning demons and securing power. Notably unlike other grimoires which dedicate significant time to protecting the magician, the Grand Grimoire simply gets down to the business of raw acquisition of power. However, some have argued that this is simply because it's a high-level specialized magic text, not to be engaged with by dabblers. Its reputation as a manual for black magic has been both a source of fascination and controversy. The Catholic Church, for instance, has allegedly condemned it, and legends claim the original manuscript resides in the Vatican's archives. Occult practitioners today view it as both a practical guide and a historical artifact. Some believe its rituals and spells hold genuine power, while others see it as a symbolic or psychological tool. Still others view it as a dangerous tome which doesn't offer adequate protection for the high-level magic it has on offer. Eric Stapleton, a 58-year-old resident of Quartzsite, Arizona, was reported missing in May 2014, prompting a community-wide search and raising concerns about his unexplained disappearance. Stapleton was last seen on May 18, 2014, at his residence near Riggles Road in Quartzsite. When he failed to report for work on May 20th, his absence was immediately noticed, as it was uncharacteristic of him to miss work without notice. Concern escalated when friends and family discovered his cell phone and car at his home with the front door left open, a scenario that suggested a sudden, urgent departure. In response to his disappearance, the Quartzsite Police Department issued a missing person notice and initiated a search operation. The local community, being very tight-knit, rallied together, distributing flyers and organizing search parties in hopes of locating Stapleton. Despite these concerted efforts, weeks passed without any significant leads or sightings. On January 20th, 2015, a breakthrough occurred when someone discovered human skeletal remains in the Skadden Wash area. This area is approximately 1 mile south of Interstate 10, near Quartzsite. The Quartzsite Police Department responded promptly, and the remains were sent to the Pima County Medical Examiner's office in Tucson for identification. Through dental record comparison, the remains were positively identified as those of Eric Stapleton. The discovery of Stapleton's remains provided some closure to his family and the community, yet many questions lingered. The circumstances surrounding his death remained unclear, with the cause and manner of death undetermined. As of now, his cause of death has not been disclosed, and the case remains open, suggesting foul play may have been involved. The Matsukawa derailment, which occurred in Japan on August 17, 1949, remains one of the most controversial and widely discussed railway incidents in the country's post-war history. The case initially appeared to be a straightforward act of sabotage against Japanese national railways, but would develop into something much bigger. The Matsukawa derailment took place on a section of the Tohoku Main Line near Matsukawa Station in Fukushima Prefecture. At around 3:09 a.m. on August 17, 1949, a passenger train traveling from Aomori to Tokyo derailed, causing the locomotive and several cars to topple over. 3 railway employees lost their lives in the accident, creating an immediate sense of shock and urgency. Japan, still reeling from the aftermath of the war, found itself grappling with labor disputes, severe economic hardship, and intense ideological conflict. Under these conditions, the authorities were quick to suspect that the derailment wasn't just an accident, but an act of sabotage intended to undermine the stability of critical infrastructure. Before long, suspicion fell on members of the Japan Communist Party, the JCP, and affiliated labor unions, including the National Railway Workers Union. In the broader historical context, 1949 saw 3 high-profile railway incidents, which had the country on edge. The other 2 were the Shimoyama incident, the mysterious death of JNR President Satonori Shimoyama, and the Mitaka incident, a runaway train incident. These events fueled an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, and they all became the subject of intense police scrutiny. Investigators believed that radical elements within the labor movement might have orchestrated these disasters to foment broader social unrest. They further suspected that these elements may have Soviet backing, as both the Americans and the Japanese were still worried about Japan drifting into the Soviet sphere. The government, which at the time was focused on suppressing leftist ideologies, found the perfect opportunity to clamp down on potential dissidents. This backdrop set the stage for the Matsukawa derailment trial. By October 1949, police had arrested a number of individuals, most of whom were union members or affiliated with the JCP. Ultimately, 20 people were charged and brought to trial in connection with the incident. The prosecution argued that the defendants had conspired to sabotage the railway, alleging that they removed the metal plates securing the rails together to cause the derailment. The defense countered that the evidence was circumstantial and that the authorities had coerced confessions through harsh interrogation methods that were not in line with democratic principles. Further, the defense team consistently argued that the train's derailment may have been due to technical or operational issues unrelated to sabotage. Critics claimed that the prosecution's case hinged too heavily on unsubstantiated claims and a political desire to quell leftist movements. The first round of decisions in lower courts found several defendants guilty. In 1953, the Sendai District Court delivered its verdict, convicting many of the accused and sentencing some of them to elimination. The harshness of these rulings shocked observers both locally and internationally. International human rights organizations and Japanese advocates criticized the seeming lack of direct evidence and the possibility of confessions obtained under duress. Appeals were filed, and the case moved up the judicial ladder, landing in the Tohoku High Court. In a surprising turn of events, the Tohoku High Court in 1959 overturned the lower court's ruling, acquitting all 20 defendants. This acquittal was a landmark moment in Japan's post-war legal history, as prior to the war, appellate courts had been extremely deferential to trial rulings. The prosecution, however, refused to accept the verdict and appealed to the Supreme Court of Japan. The Supreme Court scrutinized the evidence, examined testimony, and considered allegations that the authorities might have manipulated or suppressed critical information. It wasn't until 1963 that the Supreme Court finally upheld the High Court's acquittal verdict. The final court decision concluded there was insufficient evidence to prove that any of the accused had intentionally removed the track's fastenings. This ruling also highlighted deficiencies in the investigation, including mishandled evidence, questionable interrogation tactics, and government overreach in targeting political opponents. By exonerating the defendants, the Matsukawa derailment case underscored the importance of legal safeguards and the risk of political persecution masquerading as law enforcement. Ultimately, the case was quietly shut down in 1970, without any official ruling on what caused the derailment. Was the Matsukawa incident simply a case of tragic infrastructure failure in a still war-ravaged and devastated economic environment? Or was it something more sinister? Given the actions of the authorities in this investigation, this looks as though it will remain an unsolved mystery. The Philosopher's Stone has long been regarded as one of the most elusive goals in the history of Western esotericism and occultism. It's a legendary substance that alchemists believed could transmute base metals into gold, cure diseases, and even grant extended or eternal life. Though often dismissed as a quaint relic of pre-scientific thought, the quest for the Philosopher's Stone was anchored in a complex interplay of chemistry, spirituality, philosophy, and mysticism. The roots of the Philosopher's Stone concept can be traced to the Hellenistic period, especially in the city of Alexandria, where various philosophical and religious traditions intermingled. Early texts that influenced alchemical thought, such as the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, laid the groundwork for the idea that matter could be transmuted. Over time, these early works merged with Arab and Persian scholarly traditions. Following the Islamic conquests, Greek manuscripts on natural philosophy and the proto-science of alchemy were translated into both Arabic and Persian. By the Middle Ages, when these Arabic and Persian texts were translated back into Latin, European alchemists were primed to embrace the elusive notion of the Philosopher's Stone. In medieval and early Renaissance Europe, alchemy enjoyed periods of both acclaim and suspicion. The distinction between science and magic was not as clear-cut as it is today, and alchemists often combined practical experimentation with esoteric symbolism. The Philosopher's Stone was not merely a literal object. Rather, many alchemists understood it as the culmination of both a chemical and spiritual journey. In this sense, the stone symbolized perfection, enlightenment, and the harmonization of opposites. Achieving it required not just laboratory work, but also moral purification and personal transformation. The stone's ability to turn lead into gold was seen as a metaphor for uplifting the human soul from its base state to divine perfection. One of the most famous figures associated with the quest for the Philosopher's Stone was Nicolas Flamel, a 14th century French scribe and manuscript seller. Although historical evidence suggests Flamel's reputation as an alchemist was largely a product of later legends rather than contemporary records, he became a central figure in alchemical lore. According to the stories, Flamel, with the guidance of obscure texts and revelations, supposedly discovered the secret of the stone and achieved both wealth and longevity. Similarly, the 16th century Swiss physician and alchemist Paracelsus advanced alchemy's medical dimensions and integrated them with natural philosophy. Though he didn't claim to have found the Philosopher's Stone, Paracelsus believed in the possibility of extracting essences from substances that could cure illnesses and prolong life. His emphasis on observation, experimentation, and the healing potential of minerals and plants helped transition alchemy toward more empirical approaches. The tradition of seeking the Philosopher's Stone was not confined to Europe's elite intellectual circles. Courtly alchemists worked under royal patronage, hoping to bolster a monarch's wealth and prestige by conjuring gold from cheaper metals. Individuals like Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire were fascinated by alchemy, amassing manuscripts and skilled practitioners in the hope of unlocking nature's secrets. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the rise of the scientific method, better instrumentation, and new theoretical frameworks began to strip alchemy of its mystical elements. By the late 18th century, the dream of the Philosopher's Stone had effectively receded into myth, replaced by a rigorous approach to understanding of elements and chemical reactions. Also, I mentioned it briefly in passing earlier, but it's really worth emphasizing that the concept of the Philosopher's Stone was never purely about precious metals. In many treatises, gold was simply the most elevated and incorruptible of metals, symbolizing the highest possible refinement. The stone, therefore, was a metaphor for achieving ultimate purity and understanding the inner workings of nature. This symbolic dimension survived even as the literal pursuit faded. In the 19th and 20th centuries, scholars and esotericists rediscovered alchemical texts with renewed interest, viewing them through psychological and symbolic lenses. Psychologist Carl Jung interpreted alchemical imagery as representations of internal psychic processes. In Jung's reading, the philosopher's stone was the perfected self, reached through individuation and inner work. The Mogollon Monster, often referred to as Arizona's Bigfoot, is a cryptid said to inhabit the Mogollon Rim, a rugged escarpment extending across central and eastern Arizona. Eyewitnesses commonly describe it as a large, bipedal ape-like creature standing over 7 feet tall, with long black or reddish-brown hair covering its body. Its eyes are often reported as large and red, and it is said to emit a strong, unpleasant odor, reminiscent of a combination of dead fish and a skunk. Witnesses have also claimed that the creature lets out a blood-curdling scream, which has been described as sounding like a woman in great distress. The earliest known report dates back to 1903 in a newspaper known as the Arizona Republican. In this account, a man described encountering a creature near the Grand Canyon with long white hair and matted beard that reached to his knees. The man also noted that the creature was wielding a club and screeching during their encounter. According to one account of a cryptozoologist, an encounter occurred during a Boy Scout trip near Payson, Arizona in the 1940s. The creature the scouts ran across was described as having deep-set, expressionless eyes, a hairless face, and a square-shaped head. However, all that said, I wasn't able to find any primary accounts of this from the time, so I suspect it was likely made up. Numerous hikers and other wilderness enjoyers in the area have also reported encounters with the creature over the course of the 20th and 21st centuries. Additionally, several individuals on the Fort Apache Indian Reservation have claimed encounters with the Mogollon Monster throughout the years. The scientific community generally attributes these sightings to misidentifications or hoaxes. They dismiss the idea that a large humanoid creature could remain hidden in such an area, categorizing it as mythology rather than science. Some skeptics suggest that sightings may be attributed to known animals. As recently as the mid-1930s, grizzly bears inhabited Arizona's forests. Other large mammals, such as black bears, mountain lions, elk, and even owls, could also account for these reports. The Mogollon Monster has become an integral part of Arizona's folklore, inspiring various tales and legends. One story involves an Arizona pioneer named Sam Spade, who built a log cabin near what is now Camp Geronimo, only to be attacked by the creature. Later, his son and future daughter-in-law were reportedly killed by the monster on their wedding day. These narratives suggest the creature's origins stem from either displaced Native Americans seeking revenge or a pioneer cursed by spirits after escaping an attack by Native Americans. Another tale describes the monster as the phantom of a colonist punished for slaying a Native American woman and doomed to roam the woods eternally. Others link the Mogollon Monster to legends of skinwalkers, strongly suggesting the being is a supernatural creature rather than an actual animal. Yet others claim it's an alien or interdimensional entity roaming the area. The Gold Sock Killer is the moniker given to an unidentified serial offender responsible for the slayings of a woman and 2 teenage girls in Broward County, Florida, in 1973. The nickname derives from the perpetrator's method of strangling his victims with socks, notably using a gold-colored sock in 2 instances. The first known victim was 42-year-old Kelpian Patrick, whose body was discovered on July 4th, 1973. She had been strangled with a sock, and her body was left in a field near Fort Lauderdale. On August 2nd, 1973, 17-year-old Barbara Schreiber was found slain under similar circumstances. She had been strangled with a gold-colored sock, and her body was left in a wooded area near Pompano Beach. The third victim, 16-year-old Belinda Hutchins, was discovered on August 24, 1973. She had been strangled with a gold-colored sock, and her body was found in a canal near Hollywood, Florida. However, one woman was lucky enough to escape with her life. On July 25, 1973, a 25-year-old woman in Fort Lauderdale narrowly escaped an attack by someone believed to be the perpetrator. As she entered her first-floor apartment around 9:15 p.m., the assailant, who had broken in by prying open a window, confronted her and attempted to strangle her with a sock. The woman fought back vigorously, kicking and screaming, which led to a struggle that overturned a coffee table and ended with both of them falling onto the couch. The perpetrator then got up and fled, likely fearing that her screams and the commotion would attract attention. The victim described her assailant as a slim, blonde-haired white man. Despite extensive investigations and the harrowing first-hand account, the identity of the gold sock killer remains unknown. The case has grown cold over the decades, with no new leads or suspects emerging. The gold sock killer's crimes are part of a broader pattern of unsolved slayings in South Florida during the 1970s that remain unresolved to this day. Because of this, some have speculated that he may be responsible for many more slayings than we know of. Notably, the police identified a man as a suspect in 1974 after he strangled a woman with a scarf. However, there was insufficient evidence to charge him in relation to the gold sock slayings. Like with many unsolved crimes we've discussed throughout this series, I suspect at this point, the best chance of resolution will be through genetic genealogy techniques. That said, it's unclear to me if the authorities have retained any of the genetic genealogy firms to help them investigate this case.